I will say that in this case, you had the parents bought the gun for their son as a Christmas gift, from what we know, or at least what prosecution is saying. And they were once warned about him looking for ammunition on his phone while he was at school. Now, obviously, that's not necessarily going to be something that indicates he's going to carry out a school shooting, but it was an issue that the school had already brought up once. And then on the day of the shooting, my understanding is, he was found to have drawn notes that indicated he was going to commit a mass shooting. Now, these were drawings, but they showed essentially scenes of killing. I believe they had notes that wrote, blood everywhere, please help, make the voices stop, things that are extremely disconcerting and indicate, could, to any reasonable person, could indicate that this child is suffering a severe mental health episode that could lead to violence, specifically violence committed with the gun that the parents bought. And when the parents were called into the school and told about this, they did not remove the alleged shooter from school. They left him in school that day. They didn't check his backpack or check whether or not the gun that they had bought for him was in fact at home where it was supposed to be. And it turned out that, and so he was sent back to class, and he had the gun on him that entire time, from what we understand. And then he carried out that shooting that day. So, it obviously these do seem like pretty damning facts as far as at least how incredibly irresponsible the parents were. Now, you could also suggest perhaps that the school should have done more in this circumstance as well. And maybe that plays into their defense. The school didn't think it was serious enough to keep him out of class, I guess. So maybe there'll be more that comes out, but those facts are pretty damning, right?
So 2 points. I want to frame this as gently as possible, but it is an important point to keep in mind when we're reporting upon decisions by prosecutors to bring charges. These are not facts. They are allegations. They have not been proven in a court of law. We have heard only one side of the story. We have heard the prosecution side. With that out of the way, if what the prosecution says is true, this is an egregious case of an astonishing irresponsibility on the part of the shooter's parents. The question that I raise in my article, and that I'm primarily concerned with, is not just this case, but future cases where, in a context where a principle has been accepted at a certain level of generality, parents can be held accountable as felons for the crimes of their children, and what kind of impact that has on people who are not the Crumblies. Because this case has received a ton of attention. People are monitoring it very carefully, but it will drop off the radar. And when it drops off the radar, the exercise of prosecutorial discretion is going to be operating in ways that people are not always able to see. 92 to 95% of criminal adjudications never see the lights of a courtroom. They are pled out. Prosecutors bring charges. There are what are euphemistically described as plea bargains, but really they are coerced agreements. If you just invoke your Sixth Amendment right to trial by jury, you face the prospect of a harsher punishment than you would face if you voluntarily plead guilty and accept the punishment the state has specified for the offense. So, in that setting, we're not just worried about, the facts of a case that we are aware of possibly stretching the law. We have to worry that facts are never going to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt at all. We have to assume that whatever law is created by this case is going to be stretched. And we have to price that into our decision about how to think about this case right now, rather than simply saying, which I'm not suggesting that you're saying this, but it is an argument that gets raised in this context. Yes, but this case is particularly egregious. In the context of the criminal law, you can never just think about this case. You've got to think forward, and you've got to think about the cases that you're not seeing.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your main concern here, and certainly it comes across in the piece, is about the sort of precedent that this prosecution is going to set, even if it doesn't make it to trial, perhaps. Just the fact that prosecutors might try this more and more aggressively down the line is going to have an impact. And obviously in your piece, you're particularly concerned about the kind of people or who is going to be impacted by some of these perhaps even more dubious prosecutions down the line. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So in candor, I must say that my starting point does a lot of work in terms of like the disposition that I take towards proposed expansions of the criminal law in any setting. The starting point is that American law right now makes too many people into criminals. It punishes them too harshly, and it punishes them in ways that either have the purpose or the effect of disproportionately burdening racial minorities. That's why we have a burgeoning prison population that is unprecedented in size in our own national history and is internationally distinctive. And that's why that prison population is disproportionately constituted by racial minorities, and in particular Black Americans. Now, one of the reasons that the criminal law does these things is because prosecutors have a great deal of discretion. They have too much discretion. They have too much discretion who to prosecute, what to charge, and whether those charges are ever subject to adversarial testing. So I come in with a strong presumption against virtually any expansion of criminal law. If I see a proposed statute that makes more people into criminals, I presume that it's going to do more harm than good. If I see a decision by a prosecutor who's making novel charging decisions, I presume that it's not a good idea, even if it's within the letter of the law. But I do look more closely into it to determine whether there really is specific cause for concern that this law or this prosecutorial decision will exacerbate the problem that I've identified with racially disproportionate incarceration and punishment. And in this case, I do see things that raise concerns.